That curtain, wall of a curtain, fell down today in the new Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., which got its first paying customer for one of the function rooms where the curtain fell down. The Trump campaign rented one of the rooms for an appearance by Donald Trump. So Donald Trump's campaign contributors today paid Donald Trump to rent a room for Donald Trump to stand up in front of microphones and say this.
Hillary Clinton and her campaign of 2008 started the birther controversy. I finished it. You know what I mean. President Barack Obama was born in the United States, period. Now we all want to get back to making America strong and great again. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you.
Had to tell a couple of lies while retracting one lie. Donald Trump, of course, refused to take any questions after retracting his 5 years of nonstop lying about President Obama's birth. David Fahrenthold of the Washington Post was there, and he yelled a question about Donald Trump's charitable contributions. David Fahrenthold is now specifically pursuing the $5 million that Donald Trump once promised to donate if President Obama could prove he was born in Hawaii. Now that Donald Trump says he accepts that proof, he owes $5 million to charity. $5 million that, according to David Fahrenthold's reporting thus far, Donald Trump will never contribute to charity because Donald Trump no longer contributes to charity. He hasn't done that in years. The Trump campaign strategy today was to get rid of a problem, not create a problem. The Trump campaign believed that all they needed was for Donald Trump to say President Barack Obama was born in the United States, and then they could go on with the campaign and especially the debates without ever again having to deal with Donald Trump's lies about President Obama's birth. It is now up to the debate moderators to decide whether the Trump campaign trick today worked. It is up to them. Will they ask Donald Trump why it took him 5 years to accept the validity of Barack Obama's birth certificate? And why didn't he accept the validity of the short form birth certificate that was released in 2008? Will the debate moderators simply let it slide that Donald Trump lied about this?
I have people that actually have been studying it, and they cannot believe what they're finding.
You have people now down there searching, I mean, in Hawaii?
Absolutely, and they cannot believe what they're finding.
Donald Trump needs to be asked at the debates, what did those people find that they could not believe? He needs to be asked the names of those people. He needs to be asked, did those people really exist, or are they imaginary Trump people, like the thousands of people Donald Trump lied about seeing on 9/11 in New Jersey cheering at the collapse of the Twin Towers? The Trump campaign's trick today to try to put the foundational lie of the Trump candidacy behind them should only encourage the media, and especially the debate moderators, to continue to try to rip away the wall of lies that Donald Trump's campaign is built on. It took 5 years for the political media to finally crack through Donald Trump's first big political lie of his career. The political media now has only 52 days to crack through the rest. Joining us now, Mark Thompson, host of Make It Plain on Sirius XM Radio, David Corn, Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones and an MSNBC political analyst. Also with us, Rick Wilson, Republican strategist and contributor to the website Heat Street. He's also an advisor to Evan McMullin, who is running for president as an independent. Mark Thompson, we've waited a long time for this moment, this fact that all the rest of us knew for many, many years now. We waited for Donald Trump to admit the truth of it. This is how long it took, and this is how he did it. Your reaction?
Pure theater. Thanks for having me, Lawrence. Pure theater. on the part of Donald Trump. And, you know, he bragged about how he finished it, and you know what I mean. Still very, very disturbing. What Donald Trump did was attack the president, attack all Americans, attack all citizens, attack African Americans. What he said today is not enough. He needs to apologize to President Obama and the American people for trying to relitigate the 14th Amendment, for reminding us all how we've been discriminated against as African Americans in this country for centuries before we had citizenship, and how our citizenship has always been questioned, even down to the birth certificate. You know, Ossie Davis used to tell the story about how his mother named him R.C., but the white clerk put on the birth certificate Ossie. Many of our names and birth certificates are wrong for that reason. Our names, after all, are not our names anyway. So to do what he's done for at least the past 5 years, to question the president's citizenship, to make him other, to remind us and validate the words of Ralph Ellison that we are invisible men and women, to validate the words of W.B. Du Bois, our irreconcilable strivings, and then to attack Hillary Clinton, when women, after all, if full citizenship is suffrage and the right to vote, women, after all, are only second-generation citizens in this country. And here you have a woman running, succeeding in the spirit of someone like Shirley Chisholm. He has insulted so many people. Donald Trump is probably one of the most despicable candidates in history. And lastly, I'll say, the new Museum of African American History and Culture is about to be open. Donald Trump's picture, if it goes in that museum, should be right there alongside slavers, should be right there along those who've always questioned our citizenship, made us prove we could recite the Constitution before we voted, all of those things. Donald Trump is not about making America great again. He's about making America the worst again.
Let's listen to what Hillary Clinton said about this today.
Donald Trump looks at President Obama after 8 years as our president. He still doesn't see him as an American. Think of how dangerous that is. Imagine a president who sees someone who doesn't look like him and doesn't agree with him and thinks that person must not be a real American.
David Corn, that was a little bit before Donald Trump spoke today, so it was before Hillary Clinton could have heard him blame her for his big lie.
You know, I've been heartened today, actually, because I've seen a lot of the media, the mainstream media, and I don't mean that as a pejorative term, actually deal with a liar the way a liar should be dealt with. They've called this a lie. In the past, you know, we've talked about this, Lawrence. Often they talk about how Trump may stretch the truth, or he may exaggerate, or he may flip-flop. But this has been a lie, not just today, when he talks about Hillary Clinton, but everything he has said about birtherism for 5 years. And the way that slavery was the original sin of America, birtherism is the original sin of the Trump campaign. I used the words foundational, which I was thinking about today. It is how he got to be a hero for conservatives and what launched this campaign. He's never shied away from it. He lied today when he said, I finished it. Katie Tur has been on today multiple times talking about how through this campaign, up until a couple of weeks ago, he kept playing the birther card and pushing that button. He knows what he's doing. The polls show us that too many Republicans actually believe this sort of crap about Obama not being born here or being a secret Muslim. He's played to that. The 3, 4, 5 sentences he said today will not, I think, put an end to this. And I'll start off by saying, I'll finish off by saying what I said at the beginning. I think the coverage has been really quite strong, and it needs to continue.
Let's listen to what Bernie Sanders said about it today.
It was delegitimizing the first African-American president in the history of our country. And the reason for that was clear. There are racists in this country who could never accept the fact that we had a black president.
Rick Wilson, do you agree with Bernie Sanders on that?
You know, I think, Lawrence, that that's a factor in it, but I will say that that for the most part, I've always been offended by the birther thing from the very beginning, back when we were able to resolve this in 2008 in about 4 phone calls that he was an American citizen born in Hawaii. It's always offended me that Republicans were so stupid as to buy in to something that was going to hurt my party, or my maybe former party, in the end, because these guys sold it, this media complex, with Jerome Corsi and all these nutcases and World Nut Daily and all these people that fed this to credulous, lower information Republicans, and they built this thing that was eventually going to be something that was both shameful because it was so untrue and its underpinnings, but also politically damaging. Donald Trump is proven today, once again, he's willing to smear conservatives with the worst kind of problem because he doesn't care. His audience plays to this. His audience loves this. His audience is comprised of people who really live in that fantasy bubble right now of Barack Obama's a secret Muslim from Kenya, and any minute now he's going to launch his communist takeover of the country. So it's just always been something that stuns me, how people can see something that's so obvious and know that this is going to damage Republicans and conservatives, and they still sort of play this game and allow Donald Trump to play this game.
Donald Trump just got another controversy going tonight, speaking in Miami. Let's listen to what he said.
Now, she's very much against the Second Amendment. She wants to destroy your Second Amendment. Guns, 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 right? I think what we should do is she goes around with armed bodyguards like you have never seen before. I think that her bodyguards should drop all weapons. They should disarm, right? Right? I think they should disarm.
We've just gotten a statement by Robbie Mook of the Clinton campaign, and the statement says Donald Trump, the Republican nominee for president, has a pattern of inciting people to violence. Whether this is done to provoke protesters at a rally or casually or even as a joke, it is unacceptable. It is an unacceptable quality in anyone seeking the job of commander-in-chief. This kind of talk should be out of bounds for a presidential candidate. Just like it should be out of bounds for a presidential candidate to peddle conspiracy theory about the President of the United States for 5 years. But we've seen again and again that no amount of failed resets can change who Donald Trump is. He is unfit to be president. It is time Republican leaders stand up and denounce this disturbing behavior in their nominee. Mark Thompson, that whole question of are we going to see a new Donald Trump? I think people gave up on that a while ago, and this is another one of those nights where no one expects any real differences.
No, and as in the words of Joan Walsh, this definitely isn't Xanax Trump. I agree with David. The media has done a much better job today. I also agree with what Rick said. Rick, I think you coined a new phrase from basket of deplorables to bubble of deplorables. I think that's what I heard. But I'll tell you something else too, gentlemen. We recall, and studies showed this in 2008 and 2012, people were motivated to the polls because of voter suppression. I think people will be motivated once again because of Donald Trump's rhetoric, and even because of this veiled threat he made tonight. And lastly, let me say, we didn't have the luxury as African Americans of changing our names. Our names were given to us. Air Drumpf and his family changed their name to Trump. If anybody should look in the mirror, it should be him.
Going to have to leave it there for tonight. Mark Thompson, Rick Wilson, and David Corn, thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence.